co-founder of Experience Happiness, which is a company that does some awesome work, basically helping people and organizations. I think you call it thrive through happiness. They've created a practice that they call the happiness practice, and they are working with organizations on measuring, instead of ROI, return on happiness as individuals, teams, and at organization levels. And it's all because there's a lot of stress and burnout that happens in the workplaces, and Linda and her co-founder are all about increasing happiness, building engaged, high-performance cultures of well-being. So I want to just personally thank you for accepting to present to our team. This is our kickoff for our Mental Health Awareness Month. We're going to have kind of a presenter every Wednesday. And so thanks for being here, Linda, and
thank you.
I'll let you take it away.
Okay, fabulous, guys. Can you see my screen? Do you see a girl in the rain with welcome? Yay! Okay, I'm done. Like I was saying, I'm down in my bunker with my French bulldogs, and so we're just going to cross our fingers. I'm rocking a new home done haircut for you, so this is very exciting times. So welcome. It's an honor to be here with you. As Josh was saying, I co-founded Experience Happiness like 14 and a half years ago. And, you don't wake up one day and go, I think I'm just going to have a company called Experience Happiness. Like, most entrepreneurs, we invent things, we innovate things that we need. And I had been working on Wall Street for about 10 years, and I had, kind of come back from New York, and I was noticing that I was feeling something other than depression or anxiety. It was really, really different. And I talked with my friend and my co-founder, Nancy, about it. And I said, this is scary. This is something different. And I can't really pinpoint experience was that what we didn't know then that we know now is we were burned out. And I was so burned out that I was having suicidal ideation. And ideation is different than planning. Part of my other, in the gig economy, I'm also part-time chief of staff for a company called R3 Continuum. And what we do is we deal with the trauma of global crisis like this pandemic. So we've been very busy amid COVID. So I have a very interesting career in one sense. On one side, I'm trying to, build well-being, and on the other side, it's more about responding to trauma and helping people recover and return to work and move through things like PTSD. But Experience Happiness is dedicated to helping people thrive, and we do this by helping people measurably cultivate happiness and its byproducts. So today, what I'm hoping to give you is I'm going to give you a set of tools. And even if you take one of them, these tools are proven to work. In fact, they're being rolled out by an organization in Finland right now. Finland gets it. And even if you take one of these tools and apply them in this especially challenging time, you will likely feel better. If you apply all of them, you'll feel much better. So as we talk through this today, I'm just hoping that you'll jump in if you have any questions. I'm going to leave time so we can chat. And if I have anything to say to you today that I just hope you take away in your heart, is that you really are. Everyone is deserving of happiness. You were born happy. And if you're not happy right now, that's okay, but it's in you. And these tools that I'm going to share with you today, they're kind of like tools for excavating and rediscovering that happiness that you had as a child, and kind of resurfacing it, amplifying it, bringing more of it into your life. And it's really important because I started out in advertising. I worked in your field. I was working with, Beth Temple years ago. We're like the OGs of digital marketing. She was co-founding Mima at the time, and all the people who who wanted to be in the digital space, we were acting like we knew something then. And obviously you've, grown into the real experts. I got out of the digital space, but this is a really interesting survey that was done across about 450 professionals in digital careers, and a full 32% of them were worried about their mental health. And it's really understandable because I'm sure you recognize this. There's this internal voice that comes in these environments like yours, where there's constantly new channels and strategies, technologies, skills that you have to continue to build, platforms to learn, and you got demanding clients, and there's always a deadline. So it is normal that you would feel that way. It is normal that you would experience potentially prolonged periods of chronic stress. And if we have prolonged periods of chronic stress, we can tip into burnout. I'm going to share more about that in just a moment. And then, of course, we have this guy, COVID-19. In pandemics, we have scientific evidence that what the core problem is that we grapple with as people is the anxiety of the unknown. We don't know what reopening is going to look like. We don't know if we're going to reopen and then kind of contract, or if we're going to, see another spike and fall that's coming up alongside, the flu. There's a lot of unknown, and we have to show ourselves and one another grace through this process. It is tough, and when I talk about happiness, I'm not talking about skipping down the hallway, whistling Dixie, clicking your heels. I'm talking about a different kind of happiness that will be very useful for you to cultivate in this incredibly challenging, disruptive time of uncertainty. So years ago, like in 2013, the first World Happiness Report came out, and it comes out from the United Nations. They produce them about every 2 years, and they put together found that happiness really was such a powerful thing, because if your culture is happy, if you are happy, all of these things, all these 6 things, including income, including organizational behavior, individual health and longevity, all those things are designed to improve. So happiness is it's powerful fuel in the tank, especially for people who want to perform better, or for organizations who want to innovate more. It is the most powerful jet fuel you can put in your tank. And years ago, I was really working in cross-enterprise collaboration. And what I realized was that, yeah, of course, culture eats strategy for lunch. But if a culture is burned out, you can't go anywhere. And really unhappy people just can't get much. Really valuable business strategy. And you're going to be hearing more and more about this. I think especially in light of COVID, people are realizing that if their people don't have well-being at a physical level and at a psychological level, the performance of the organization will suffer. And let's face it, this next phase in terms of business is really about surviving this cycle. We're going to be, doing kind of respond, recover, and somewhere down the road we'll be thriving, but we don't know exactly when that's going to happen. But in the meantime, we can take really good care of ourselves, do the very best we can, and there's a whole number of reasons to do this. We're going to be more productive. We're more likely to have higher sales. We'll stay in our jobs longer. We'll be a lot more creative. And, from a leadership side, absenteeism drops, and, net promoter scores go up, all these wonderful things. There's this wonderful behavioral economist, Richard Layard. He wrote a book recently that's phenomenal. And he studied behavioral economics on a global basis for years. And he just said, you know what, the goal has to be creating as much happiness as we can in the world. It drives economies, it drives policy, it drives good business. It does all these powerful things, and it's up to each of us. It's up to educators, employers, politicians. And what's been really exciting about, having experienced happiness over the last 14 years is now we know that we can actually teach people to cultivate more happiness, and we can measure the impact at an individual and a business level. And there's we got to look at what the barriers are, and the barriers really are stress and burnout. These numbers are pre-COVID. They are, needless to say, very conservative at this point. When we look at stress, we're losing in the US alone over $300 billion with a B. 83% of workers are stressed. And, there's higher absenteeism, there's higher stress levels than 5 years ago. You can imagine what's happening now in this new context. And what's really sad, if you go down to, this statistic here, a full 2/3 of workers experience burnout on the job. And just because you're highly engaged doesn't mean that you won't be burned out, because 1 in 5 employees that are highly engaged are also simultaneously burned out. And if you're burned out, employees are three times more likely to quit. And of course, you can imagine the burden this has on the healthcare spend. So I'm just giving a little context before we go into some of these tools. So here's the reality. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And this is more important than ever in this environment of a pandemic, the biggest event we've experienced in our lifetimes. This is a reality. This pandemic, what I know from the epidemiologists and the virologists I meet with every morning at 9 a.m. on my pandemic call for crisis, is that we're in a marathon. This is not a sprint. And so particularly when you're in a marathon, I don't know if any marathon, I've run one, and then I said no more. But the whole thing is that you're getting water frequently. You're taking care of yourself frequently. It's really important to fill your cup, because we are running a marathon here. And sometimes, I'm sure sometimes you may feel like this too. Sometimes I feel like I'm training at high altitude. So you just need to take care of yourself. And when you are burned out, it just simply means that your cup is empty. You got nothing left. And the formal definition is that it's complete physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. Work, family, worrying about loved ones, homeschooling, for those of you who have children. Those emotionally demanding situations, they may have been pretty heightened before, but now they're here. So I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you, because I have so much compassion for all of us, and no one is exempt. And, burnout just doesn't come from work. It can come from life. And it's not that you create burnout. Sometimes you just find yourself there. It's a little bit like being a frog that's cooked in a pot. The pot is cold when it starts, when the burner turns on, and then the heat turns up, and all of a sudden you realize you're cooked. It's really intense. And you can tell the warning signs of burnout by these 3 things. When we get burned out, we just get exhausted, depleted. Can't even tap into any reserves of energy, because there are no reserves of energy. My favorite when I was burned out was extreme cynicism toward myself, toward clients, toward my family, and lots of withdrawal from people and activities. And then feelings of just inefficacy. It just didn't matter how hard I worked. It was just, I just felt like I couldn't get where I wanted to be at the level of quality I wanted to achieve or get there fast enough. And so if you begin to see these things in yourself or others, it's a great moment to step back and have a little compassion, or a lot of compassion. When I was working with folks in New York and I would see these things, my old frame of reference was they're just being oppositionally defiant and difficult, you know. And what I realize now is that probably the majority of those people were simply burned out and they didn't know how to get themselves out of the hole. So if you look at the magnitude, I just picked some industries for you, but these are the burnout percentages across any number of professions in the United States. Again, I believe that these are conservative, especially in this current context. So you can see that alongside the COVID pandemic, we have a burnout pandemic. I don't know if any of you ever read it's so great. Arianna Huffington's New Media World of Thrive Global. I think she's been up about 3 years. Their mission statement is to end the culture of stress and burnout. So there is another pandemic going on alongside, and we'd be living under a rock, right? If we looked at the news and said, everything that's going on in our lives, as we kind of come out of COVID, the next curve we're going to need to flatten is going to be the depression and the anxiety curve. So let's talk about kind of how this impacts us. The thing about burnout is it's insidious. So it impacts our relationship with ourselves and with our loved ones, and then it comes out professionally. All of a sudden, our work relationships begin to deteriorate. When we're under chronic stress and burnout, it's scientifically proven, we make terrible decisions. Our decision-making is impeded. This is why you don't want a burned out pilot flying the plane. And then, of course, our ability to problem solve and to innovate, that's impacted as well. And then if you take that to the organization, if you just have one burned out person on your team, that burnout can then go to the larger organization, and it can impact everything from engagement to turnover to productivity to morale. So it's really important to know that what I'm going to share is a personal practice. You don't need to get this from anybody else. You give it to yourself. And you can, by doing this practice, by doing the happiness practice, you can mitigate some of this insidious effect. So I'm just going to jump right into the practice because I want to leave ample time to discuss these principles. And before I do that, I'm just going to ask you to please, if you would, just try on a new breath. I always like to, before I teach something new to people, kind of get the nervous system settled down, get your heart and your brain open and your mind open, and your body a little more relaxed so you can kind of take in the information. So I'm going to ask you, if you're comfortable, to just find a comfortable position in your chair. And if you are comfortable rolling your eyes shut, please do. You can drape your hands wherever you choose to drape your hands. Put your feet flat on the floor and keep your spine straight. And I want you to just notice your breath. Follow my voice and just notice your breath. And then begin to just see where it's at. Connect with it and don't judge it. Could be shallow, it could be fast, it might be slow. Whatever it is, it's fine. And from that place, just begin to deepen your inhale and lengthen your exhale. Allowing your belly to expand, your shoulders to drop, and just give yourself this moment to just get centered. In just a moment, we're going to be doing a 4-part breath. So I'm going to ask you to inhale through your nose for 4 counts. I'll count it out for you. I'm going to have you hold it for 4 counts. And then exhale through the nose for 4 counts. And then you're going to hold out the exhale. So let's do 2 deep breaths in before we begin. Deep breath in and exhale. Another deep breath in. Exhale. Inhale through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gently hold it. 2, 3, 4. Exhale through your nose. 2, 3, 4. Hold the exhale. 2, 3, 4. Again, inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold the exhale. 2, 3, 4. One more time on your own, please. And when you're finished with that round, just take a notice. Just take a scan. Notice any shifts you felt in your body, in your awareness. And just begin to wiggle your toes and your fingers. Rub your hands together. Generate some heat. And place a palm over each eye. And slowly blink open and return to the room. It's a quick shift, right? I love that because, sometimes when I worked like with, trauma docs or whatever, they need to do something to quickly shift their nervous system, in between patients or in between any time. And if you are driving, just do that breath, but don't close your eyes. So there's a lot of science behind that breath. It's actually called box breath. And if you Google it, you can find a million ways to do that. If sometimes a 4 count is too much, you can do 3 seconds, or you can increase it. The yogis would increase that maybe up to, a 30-second hold, which is just insane. And that's not going to happen in my lifetime. So it's just a little tool you can put in your toolbox from today. So I'm going to walk you through the happiness practice, gang. This is the solution that we spent 14 years developing. And at its core and if you watch my cursor here, there's 5 principles: being conscious, honor feelings, release control, co-create what works now, and learning life lessons. All of those live at the core of the practice. And then we measure, as Josh said, using return on happiness. And what's cool about THP, and I'm just going to call it THP from this point forward, is that this is a well-being and performance solution. And it's a life practice, though. It's your practice. You don't need a yoga mat. You don't need anyone to do this. It's yours. And the more you put into it, the better you're going to feel. And it does a number of things. At a quantifiable level, it improves not only emotional health, but behavioral health, how you behave and how you act, and also your physical health as well. It increases happiness while reducing stress and burnout, and it improves both human and business performance. So we look at this kind of as a human optimization practice. And right now, in this time of pandemic, you might just go, you know what, this is the way I do self-care. And you don't have to, you don't even have to draw a bath. You don't need to have a massage. It takes no time and no money to do, which is awesome. So typically when we do this inside organizations, I'll just touch on this so you can understand how we measure. We always look at these three byproducts here: innovation, resiliency, and sustainability. Because what we know is that what the research has shown us is that um, innovation, resiliency, and sustainability, they're all byproducts of being happy. They just naturally happen. And so we're always consistently measuring those things. And we look at, what's happening individually with those shifts, but we're also looking at the organizational impact. So with the organizational impact, the cool thing is that you can get all the way to KPIs. You can get all the way to things like reduction in errors or improvements in performance, which is awesome. I don't share this to brag. I share this to get you excited about this, because this is the midpoint snapshot of a person who was being coached through THP. This was a senior clinical executive, a chief clinical officer. And this was her midpoint snapshot. And after about 3.5 months of practicing THP, her burnout went down by a full third, and her happiness came up almost 50%. So I'm going to give you the link so you can take your assessment and get your own snapshot. And you can kind of use that to gauge, okay, what's going on physically, emotionally, behaviorally? Where am I at on my levels here? And you might be able to see how you can take better care of yourself, especially in a time where that's really, really important. So before I went on as part-time chief of staff for R3 Continuum, this global behavioral health company, they put 80% of their employee population through THP. And, these are psychologists and social workers and forensic psychiatrists and everything else. This is great. And their results were phenomenal. Over 6 months, their burnout went down by about 24%. You can see here, happiness, innovation, engagement, all these things went up. And then we were able to, through financially modeling with their finance team, determine that it helped their revenue be 3.5% above plan. Their net income was 21 times beyond plan that year. It was insane. And they said that it definitely had a direct correlation to this. They gave us permission to publish this data. And then they lowered their operating expenses. Happen individually and collectively when we cultivate happiness. So let's talk about what happiness is. For any person who knows me really, really well, you're going to know that I am never going to ask you to be positive. I would rather have you operating with a quiet mind than a positive mind. The way we look at happiness, it is not about manufacturing positivity. And in our research, we found that, I would ask people, with all the positive psychology out there, do you feel like you need to be positive all the time? Well, yeah. And how do you feel if you can't be positive? Well, I feel like a failure. I feel guilty. I feel like a bad person. Just take the positivity stuff and just put it over here for a moment. And I'm going to invite you to redefine happiness, because we really couldn't find a good answer, even when we were talking to scientists and psychiatrists and everybody. So we started talking to little kids, like under the age of 5. And we said, what is happiness? And deconstruct it for us. And they said, well, when I'm happy, I feel really good about myself, and I feel really like serene, I'm calm. And I also feel really excited about what I can do in the world, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. So this is the kind of happiness we're aiming for. It is your innate ability to really kind of locate and cultivate that innate serenity and excitement about your life, regardless of outside forces. So this is the kind of happiness, if you think about it this way, you were born with it, it's in you. Sometimes we just need tools and some help to kind of rediscover it. But this is the kind of happiness that allows us to stay calm and effective in the midst of a storm like we're going through now. It's the kind of happiness that makes you so naturally resilient that you're always okay. no matter what. And if you look at it, one of the things, and I'm just going to have you just think about something for a moment and feel into it actually. I'd like you to think about how you act and how you feel. Could be both physically and emotionally when you're in the opposite of serenity. Just maybe jot down a couple of noticing there. How do you feel and how do you behave when you're in the opposite of serenity? We're just hanging in our bunkers. Take a moment to notice how you feel and how you behave when you're in the opposite of excitement. And Josh, would you mind if I picked on you just to kind of share what you noticed?
I suppose. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so I guess the opposite of like feeling serenity is all of the attributes that I would associate with just being like stressed out, right? I feel anxious, I feel out of control, I feel like yeah, it's mostly around like control. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm out of control.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I can respond like with what I would like my own self to be, right? I'm short with people, I'm irritable, and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
There's other people you can pick on though. So I'll give you names. So there's two other people who I've been working with on the mental health awareness. One of them is Aaron and the other is Jasmine. So I would love for those guys to jump in too and help us out about what they were thinking about serenity or excitement.
That'd be great. What do
Or
you feel when you're in
anyone
those
else,
opposite states? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jasmine, do you go ahead? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. This is Aaron.
Aaron, hi. I can't see you right now because I've got just my thing on my screen. So
all good.
thanks.
Yeah. Similar to what Josh was talking about, with those opposites of like serenity and excitement, we're feeling out of control, impulsive, reactive was another word that came to mind. So just not being able to make decisions that are more well thought out, I would say, and just kind of like reacting like a squirrel, I guess, to like every single stimuli that comes your way.
Ooh, shiny object.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would add on that. I had a similar thought. I just find it really difficult to really grasp any meaningful thoughts. So I feel like my thoughts are very controlled by whatever is happening around me when I'm feeling anxious, and obviously that makes it very hard for me to be myself and think like I truly would and be able to communicate like I truly would want to.
Yeah, I appreciate that, guys. Thank you. So when people really get to do a deeper dive into this, you know, when we're leading people through the bigger version of THP, what we'll say is, okay, now you wrote down how you feel and how you're behaving when you're at the opposite of serenity, excitement. And I just want you guys to take a look at the signs and symptoms of burnout: physical, emotional, and behavioral. There's 16 of them. Just check out that list. if you know, I'm coaching or working with a cohort or an individual that's, you know, been really, you know, struggling, oftentimes they'll say, oh my gosh, what do I have 14 of these? So in a sense, if you kind of look at this definition of happiness and these signs and symptoms of burnout, when people say, oh my gosh, here's how I feel, here's how I behave when I'm in the opposite of serenity and excitement, oftentimes it looks like they're chronically stressed, or worse, at the worst, they're burned out. Knowledge is power, you know. I'm not showing this to you and not inviting you to take an assessment so you can self-diagnose, is so that you can develop self-awareness and know when you got to stop, or when you need to engage in your practice, or you need to maybe shift a behavior so you can begin to feel better. So there's, if you kind of work through this exercise, it's very likely that you'll see a lot of what you write down kind of mirroring what's on this list. Okay, so let's get into the good stuff. I'm going to teach you the 5 principles of happiness. We're going to cruise through this. Normally, this is a 6-month practice, and we practice it over 6 months. So you can take a principle, practice it, and you practice it long enough so that you can change your neural pathways. So at the end of THP, your brain, if you looked at it at a biological level, your brain would actually be changed if we put your brain through a scan. I can guarantee you, for example, right now, being you know, self-quarantined and working from home, we're having new habits. We're developing new neural pathways as a result of this pandemic. So it takes 30 days to make or break a habit. We're developing new habits. So like when we do go back to work, and we have that opportunity, we're going to be breaking habits that we built. So everything about THP is about habits, and it's based on brain science. But you can learn enough today to be just extremely dangerous, and I love that. So the first principle of happiness here is to be conscious. And what this means is just simply being aware simultaneously of what you are doing and how you are feeling. Mindfulness, as it's traditionally taught, is just sort of noticing what's going on. Deeper, it's about what am I doing and how am I feeling. And the metaphor is this: you wouldn't want to put yourself or your family, your loved ones, on an airplane if the pilot was flying with just the jet engines. You want that pilot flying with full instrumentation. And if you think about consciousness, it's like, okay, you're intellectually plugged in, but you're also tuned into your emotional field. Your head and your heart are working together. And because you're tuned into your emotional field and you're tuned into that emotional data, you can sense and respond and make decisions that amplify your happiness. You have the data you need to say, I'm going to shift altitude, or I'm going to shift my trajectory. I don't like where I'm going right now. And a really simple example of this is a couple years ago, I was driving down Highway 7, and I was really excited. I was just noticing what was going on in the field. I was excited, and you know, I was like I was going to see my old college roommate for lunch, and this was going to be great, and we are going to have so much fun. And then I kind of tuned into my physical symptoms. I was feeling like a little clammy, and all of a sudden I began to feel a little anxious. I noticed my heart rate was a little high. And so that's kind of how I was feeling. And then what I was doing is I was driving 65 miles an hour on a really icy road. And all of a sudden I realized, geez, Linda, you got to slow down. I made a conscious decision. I shifted, and I slowed down, and 8 seconds later, the car directly in front of me spun out and went off the road. That would have been me. So we're meant to play with all of our emotional data. None of it can hurt us. And if you begin to play with this, you might notice that it's really hard to locate how you're feeling right now. That's okay. Numbness is its own state. And there's an opportunity to go beyond numbness. Just, keep on going. Okay, what's comfortable and uncomfortable? Because it's really, really important that you tune into your emotional data. So you have the data you need to make your next conscious decision, keeping that radar screen open. This is one of the ways we take care of ourselves. When I work and coach people, work with and coach people, a lot of times just go, 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 go. People go, 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 go. And all of a sudden they just fall apart. And they don't realize that they haven't been tuned into their emotions. And all of a sudden they're just practically having a tantrum like a toddler. They're just exhausted. Consciousness keeps you from getting to those edges. It keeps you safe, actually. And it also keeps you aware of your life experience and living your life fully. The second principle is to honor feelings. So, after 30 days, people go, whoa, got a lot more emotional data than I was aware of. Honoring feelings is not about becoming an emotional fire hydrant. It's about learning how to use that data to determine what you need. What are your requests? Are they of yourself? Are they of other people? And do those requests, are they additive or do they create drama? We don't want to create drama. We just want to amplify well-being. So I'll give you an example. My 18-year-old son came in and it's quite possible I've had COVID. I was sick for like 7 weeks. I'm feeling great now, so all good. But he kind of broke my quarantine and he walked in with his friend Kevin. And I saw Jack and Kevin, two 6'5" men standing in my kitchen. And I stood 12 feet back with my mask on. And I just said, Jack, I love you. And I'm simultaneously upset with you. You broke in quarantine. My request of you is that you and Kevin spray down with Lysol, wash your hands, and you've got to leave the house. Go back to your dad's. And it just amplified his well-being and my well-being and Kevin's well-being. It wasn't dramatic at all. And Jack's been trained in the practice and he got it and it was, all good. So honoring your feelings is really important because we're able to tap into needs and go, oh, you know what? Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe you need to go on a little bike ride. Maybe you need to call a friend. Maybe you need to do a different form of self-care in that moment. Maybe you need to do the 4-part breath. Whatever it is, by honoring your feelings, you can tap into those requests needs more easily. When I first started doing this work, guys, I'm not joking, I didn't know how I felt 98% of the time. I was among the Walking Dead and I wasn't on the TV show. So, if you're like me and if you had kind of trouble tapping in, sometimes I just say, okay, imagine 2 buckets in front of you. What's comfortable and what's uncomfortable, because that's the cocktail. We're never just any one emotion. We're having complex emotional states. They're like cocktails and they're comfortable and uncomfortable. So you might be in this conversation right now. Just notice for a second, what's comfortable? Even if you just get to a couple of feelings. And then what's uncomfortable? And you don't need to share, but let's say those of you with kids at home, you might feel, the comfortable part might feel, I'm really engaged. I'm feeling good about this conversation on some level. I hope you are. You might not. That's okay too. But you might be worried about your kids because now we're over the lunch hour and I'm worrying about, okay, are my kids going to get something to eat? Can they take care of themselves? So you can feel engaged yet anxious simultaneously. It's a trip when you begin to do that and you realize that no matter what, you really are okay. You can use that data to make the next conscious decision. This is probably one of the most profound principles, and is this notion of releasing control to be empowered. This is not suggesting that you do not manage to the best of your ability, that you just don't, that you let things slide. People in your industry are not wired that way. You are wired to be high performers, high achievers. But at the core of this is doing your very best and then letting go of your attachment to the outcomes, and especially letting go of your need to control the beliefs or the behaviors of other people. And so I'd love it if, you could just tap into this notion for a moment that if your well-being relies on someone else changing in a particular way, or an external situation changing in a particular way by a particular time, what you're creating there in that moment is a hostage crisis, and your well-being is the hostage. Your happiness is the hostage. Your happiness is contingent upon that outside force, that person, that thing, that event. And the opportunity with principle number 3 is to get that energy back. Manage what you can, control what's truly in your power, and then let go. So in this moment, what I'd really love you to do is to see if you can't pinpoint just one thing that you've been trying to control, one thing, one person, one event, I don't care what it is, that's been eroding your well-being. And I'm not going to ask you to let go of it, but I'm going to ask you to consider what would happen, how would you feel if you really, really deeply let it go. So I'm going to give you an example of this. I was working with some trauma nurses, and we were doing an in-person happiness huddle in the midst of practice. And this trauma nurse came in, and it was high census, which means all the beds are filled. And she said, "Oh my God, I've been working on principle number 3." And she said, "You know what? I feel so much better." And I thought she was going to talk about her job. She's setting PICC lines, she's doing triage. She said, "No, it's not work." She goes, "It's the fact that I every year make 500 homemade Christmas cookies, and I don't want to do it this year." And she said, "It has been eroding my well-being because I feel like unless I do this, I've got to control this event. Unless I do this, I won't be loved by my friends and family." And she said, "I just realized how really crazy it was." And once she let those cookies go, she was really able to just enjoy, her day and whatever holiday was going on at the time for her. So, and especially in this COVID time, you aren't going to be able to do it all well. That's just the reality. And it's going to be okay to be just okay. It's got to be okay to be just okay. So giving yourself some grace and giving yourself some permission to let go. The 4th principle is co-creating what works now. This is really, really salient in this point in human history. We do not have a crystal ball. We do not know what's going to happen next, so we must co-create what works now. And, if you think about it, the question, what works now, is really what allows humanity to have a meaningful discussion and to evolve. It is the civilized question, and it allows everyone to kind of collaboratively feed in, okay, here's what I see is working and what's not working. Everybody gets to weigh in. But then the end question is, okay, what works now? And, you can co-create dinner tonight with your families. Some of us have been, really working at home for I think it's almost 50 days, something like that, maybe more. You may not want to cook. What works now could just be ordering in. You could turn this to bigger things. Okay, now communities, some businesses are beginning to open. What works now? Maybe there's, people who don't feel comfortable returning to work right now because they've got someone at home who is, at high risk. It's really important to have this conversation, what works now, so that we can innovate in the moment. And, now could be the next 5 minutes, it could be the next 5 weeks. So if you can kind of determine your time frame, this is when we see the innovation engine really begin to turn, and collaboration, cross enterprise silos begin to break down, because it's such a productive question. And then the last principle is to learn life lessons. And in THP, what this means, all a life lesson is just a belief that you once held that just is no longer serving you. Maybe served you at one point, but it's not serving you anymore. So I'll give you an example. I used to believe when I was in my junior executive days, wearing my, Ann Taylor black suit, I used to believe that if I didn't do it, it wouldn't be done right. So what was happening is I was working 78 hours a week. The team around me wasn't growing because I wasn't trusting them like I was trusting myself. And they weren't getting the stretch assignments that they needed. And I, of course, felt overburdened and at times resentful. Then at one point, I was given the gift of a 3-week illness, and I came back, and guess what? The world, the team was, spinning like a top. They were doing great, and they could do it just as well or better than I could. And that was such a great moment because it began to free up my attitude about things, and then, step into a different style of leadership. So looking into your belief system is how you ensure that you have lasting transformation. We can shift the way we feel, we can shift what we think, but if we shift what we believe, that's how we really get lasting change. So those are the 5 principles. And really, if you try them on, you just begin to cultivate a new way of doing, but you cultivate a new way of being first. It's kind of like upgrading your operating system, if you will. And this is a 30-day practice that I'm going to open up for some questions. Just try redefining happiness for the next 30 days. Notice when you're placing happiness outside of yourself, or maybe when you're giving other people or outside forces too much power over your well-being. I've noticed that a lot. Like when I watch the news, I'm like, oh, I'm giving that way too much power. And there's nothing I can do about it. And then just ways where your life could improve if you just kind of adopted this inside out happiness of being deeply okay. And then you can go onto our website and you can take a personal assessment so you can see where you're at on your stress and burnout. And you can kind of pinpoint areas of maybe where you could, take on some self-care. So team, I'm going to stop talking. Do you have any thoughts, any questions, insights?
Thanks, Linda. So what I've asked is if people would just put, I have a question in the chat and I'll call on them. It looks like Aaron is the first one. So go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks, Josh. And thanks, Linda. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a couple pages of notes here. Learned a lot.
Oh, good. Thanks, Aaron. I can see you now, by the way.
Oh, great. Hey, there I am. So I had a question. A lot of this focus is on things that we can do personally to cultivate happiness. I was wondering, what are some of the main things that you see companies are doing? We are working on some things at Agurian with we have a ton of different employee benefits around unlimited PTO, employee perks, the list goes on and on. What kind of things are companies doing, and have you noticed that really help accelerate that happiness process?
The reason, and of course I'm a fan of THP, but one of the things why it's an individual practice is because if you change individually, then everyone else changes around you. So I'll give you an example, Aaron. When my son learned how to drive, I was like, mom-tastic, where are you? How are you doing? La, la, la. Of course, he's never had a ding, and I've had 2 since he started to drive. He knows the practice, and he said, Mom, this is a great opportunity for you to release control to be empowered. He said, you're eroding your well-being, and you're eroding mine. And I'm like, whoa, Yoda lives in my house. So, the thing is that what's tricky for leaders, and I've talked with a lot of CEOs about this, is that, happiness doesn't come from another fitness center. It doesn't come necessarily from more PTO. It doesn't even necessarily come from more money. What we found in our research is people are lacking tools to cultivate well-being. They don't have the tools. I was not trained in this stuff as a kid. I was like, it was like put up and shut up, and what, my emotional data is valuable. And the thing is, in some cases, companies are saying, okay, we're going to really focus on psychological and physical safety, which is important. I got to make sure that no one's going to come in here and shoot me. That's good. But the next frontier that we're seeing is really getting into mental and behavioral health. What I like about THP is that no one has to be diagnosed. No one gets pathologized, because that's the barrier to getting tools. Is, what if I don't want a pathology of anxiety? What if I don't want a pathology of OCD or depression? The mission of our company is to democratize behavioral health. Everyone should have it. And at the core of behavioral health, if you are, it's different, THP is a way you can cultivate mental wellness. It is not a way you're going to treat mental illness. And I think companies need to do both. We have a lot of mental illness that is acute. We got to get to that. And we've also got to, be giving tools so they can cultivate their well-being on all levels. Mm-hmm. But it's not about going to the fitness center, as awesome as that is. Is that a helpful answer?
This is a really helpful answer. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Okay. It looks like Lydia has a question. Go ahead, Lydia.
Mute myself. So I know there are a lot of practices and things that you can kind of do to take a break and avoid burnout and stuff like that, but do you have any things that you recommend as you're building a work practice, just to integrate in to make things easier for you to kind of prevent that in the first place?
Self-awareness. If you go to the website, Lydia, and you take the assessment, I have suffered from depression since I was 10. I'm very open with people about that. The first time I took a depression assessment, I was like, oh my God. Self-awareness and education is so powerful, but really understanding what's going on with yourself. And, if you're physically symptomatic or a cluster, and then really, what I do with people is just start with consciousness, because if you just go, what am I doing and how am I feeling? Just try that for the next 30 days. You will be amazed at what you learn about yourself, because most of us are spending our time looking at other people and other outside forces around us, but we really don't have the self-awareness we need to make the shifts to empower our own choices, because everybody's so different, and if you're conscious, you can tune into your needs in that moment, because no two people are sharing the same reality. So that's the thing about programs, is they get kind of one size fits all. That's why I love this notion of practices, because they get very tailored on a moment by moment basis for the individual. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a good answer. And I have to hop off for another meeting, but yeah, thanks for answering that. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks, Lydia. Take care.
You too.
Yeah, so I think we should wrap it up here. There's a couple of people who've already jumped off just because there's, pre-scheduled meetings and stuff. But I want to say thank you, Linda. This was amazing. And for allowing us also to take that self-assessment. I think I'm going to go do that. I think that would be really interesting to kind of get a barometer on oneself. So hopefully we can, get beyond this social distancing and sometime have you over to the office so that you
I'd
can
love
see our
that.
workspace and maybe meet a few people face to face. But I really do appreciate you taking the time today to do this. It's been wonderful.
You're so welcome. And just remember, that this is a time where self-care is really important. It's super demanding. And if you're going to engage in a practice or some form of self-care, this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
No
Awesome.
time like now. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks so
Stay
much,
safe.
Linda.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.